I think that's one thing that a lot of people miss in the Waymo versus Tesla debate. Like they're
Yeah,
taking completely different approaches. Waymo's sort of up here in cost and complexity and sensors and everything, and they're trying to come down, whereas Tesla's starting at the very bottom when it comes to cost, 8 cameras, right? Things like that, and
yeah.
then trying to kind of meet Waymo in the middle. So is it controversial to even say that Waymo is ahead of Tesla right now?
I mean, I think they're ahead of Tesla in a bunch of different ways, right? They're
Mhm.
ahead in Tesla from the fact that they don't have safety drivers or riders in the places where they operate. That's open to the customer. They have more cars, way more cars operating as self-driving robotaxis
Yeah.
versus Tesla. They're also in more markets. And now the flip side of that argument would be, from that perspective, they're way ahead as actual rides per day. But
Right.
from a technical perspective, I would argue Tesla is miles ahead because
Mhm.
Tesla is optimizing for scale. The
Got it.
optimization for scale is going to be the long-term advantage,
So
in my opinion.
I
Yeah,
think that's the key. They're optimizing for scale. If or
yeah,
when they can flip that switch, they've got the vehicle production, they've got a generalized approach that can
you
launch in
got it.
multiple markets. And I think that's the thing that people kind of miss. So it's like it's kind of a pretty big if or when. And
Huge, huge.
I don't know how to, kind of, make it seem more important than just saying if or when, but like if or when things could be, I mean, they're primed to scale basically, right?
The way I like to frame it, and this is where people call me a fanboy, but I think this is a factual, objective statement. If
Hmm.
Tesla figures out how to get their scale method to a point where it's as safe or safer than a human, they are the de facto robotaxi player in the country because of that scale.
Yeah.
If they can get every Tesla to be as safe or safer than a Waymo, they're not limited by how many cars they can make.
Yeah.
They're not limited by the geography because the geography is already figured out by the AI brain because it's generalized versus it being mapped by region. And so if and when they figure it out, it's going to be very hard to compete against them because they
Yeah.
own the entire manufacturing and supply chain stack.
Got it. So, what do you think about Tesla's robotaxi rollout so far? Kind of with safety drivers and riders in Austin, kind of moving over to the Bay Area now. They, like you mentioned, they've applied and been granted this permit in Arizona. Would you do anything differently, or do you sort of like the approach they're taking?
I think the approach is good. I think they're trying to be safe. From my perspective, I think what I'm looking for is the speed. It's
Hmm.
it's the acceleration of not just the regions that they get into, but the geofence expansion. Because
Hmm.
from the very beginning, the entire approach that they're taking optimizes for that scale to be able to go really fast. And so for what I'm looking for is the acceleration of the regions that they're going to turn on and the amount of cars they're going to have in that region. I mean, so they launched in June. It's been July, August, September, October, November. It's been 5 or so months. We've had a little bit of a sort of slowdown of how many regions they've gone into and how many cars they have. And that some of that could be because they don't have enough data to prove out that they're safe enough. Maybe they don't have enough corner cases figured out.
Hmm.
Maybe they were waiting for this FSD V14 version to come through and take it to the next level. I've had it in my Cybertruck for the last 3 days. I haven't had to touch the steering wheel, not even once. And the thing literally goes from driveway to parking spot in a parking lot or
Yeah.
side streets or whatever. Now, Tesla has that software internally for longer than we do. But again, they're waiting. I think from my perspective, what they're probably doing is they're waiting for the safety profile to come through. And if it doesn't match, then we're going to have to wait again. Right.
Yeah.
And so and that's the one thing with the Tesla story that people get really impatient because the solution that they're going for is so novel that it's very easy to say, well, see, I told you it's not going to happen. But in reality, it's like, well, they're the only ones that are doing it this way.
Yeah.
And if they
Yeah.
figure it out, that's where their advantage comes from is figuring it out. Just in the
Definitely.
same way that they figured out EVs at scale or reusable rockets, right? SpaceX, look at this guy's rockets is blowing up all the time. Once they don't, they have
Yeah,
a monopoly.
then they're pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been critical of, I mean, any AV company really, other than Waymo, that was sort of, like I kind of joked that my bar was paid driverless rides, and I thought anything else was kind of noise, sort of theatrical. Oh, we're
Sure.
expanding. Oh, we're testing here. Like, I guess to me, like, I don't know. I don't work at an AV company, obviously, but so it's easy for me to sit in my chair and say, but, I see a lot of companies making announcements and,
Yeah.
I guess like to me, what do you think about Tesla? They're expanding the operating area and, I see these kind of, I think they're kind of a bit silly, comparisons of Tesla's operating area to Waymo's, but Waymo is doing paid driverless rides. Okay. They have 5 times the operating area, but they don't do paid driverless rides. That's my
Right.
bar to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very fair bar from the standpoint of show me what you're actually doing that proves that you're a self-driving fleet operating company. I think that's a very fair statement. Where I come from, so I come from an investing background. I come from a background that is trying to identify things that are ahead of time and saying, okay, here's the likelihood of this happening based on the evidence that I have that this is a defensible moat. Right. That's how I think about companies. That's how I think about my entire life. That's how my brain's wired.
Yeah.
And so from my standpoint, the current time is 100% correct. Your statement of Waymo is doing it and Tesla isn't 1000% correct. Where I come from is this will not be the case for much longer. And that's not the case for much longer. It's going the shift is going to be very drastic, very quick, and very sudden to where you're going to have from one player in Waymo that's doing almost all of the rides to Waymo being just a speck in a matter of 1 to 2 years. That's how I view this shift. And from my perspective, we will know for sure if they're on track to do this sometime in the first half of next year. Like it's happening. Like this should come down the pike very quickly. And if it doesn't get there and Waymo keeps expanding even further and faster and Tesla's falling behind, then it requires sitting back down and being like, okay, what are we missing here? What are we missing here? Are we looking at this incorrectly? It's sort of like, what is Tesla being misleading? Are they lying? You know, or
I think you're onto something. I mean, if Tesla's here expanding new operating areas, I mean, it might be internally more for testing, more for validation, for safety, and fans of the company might look at that and sort of use that for comparisons to Waymo. But I don't really actually know, that those could be like two different, interests, I guess you would say. You know what I mean? When I see people comparing the operating area, Tesla might not care what it has to do with Waymo, but for them, like you said, if they're taking that generalized approach, they want to be able to launch in a city like Austin or LA or San Francisco, and they want to be able to cover the entire region, whereas Waymo will take a slower, more methodical, okay, we'll expand south, now north, now east, right? It's kind of, it leans into Tesla's approach.
100, exactly. And you got it right. I think the lens from which people look at this is the most interesting part of it, because like I think the way you framed it is so correct. Is like the approaches are very different. It's the same end goal of self-driving fleet, but the way they've come at the problem couldn't have been any more different. It's like literally like everything about it is different.
Honestly like the opposite.
Literally the opposite.
You are in a car, but it's like everything, and you're getting from A to B without a driver. Those two things are the same, but every other thing is different.
Which makes from a technology perspective, this is why it's so fascinating. It's so nascent and early. Like this is the curve of technology where at the beginning you have a lot of players doing it very differently. Zoox, Waymo, Pony, Tesla, et cetera, et cetera. But then as the technology matures, there's a convergence to, okay, this is how we should all do it. Like cars when they were first built, the steering wheel and pedal wasn't the first method to get the car from point A to point B. You had the lever and the things and whatever. And then over time, as the technology got better and better, and then there was an optimal solution, everybody converged to that. We're at the very beginning of that S curve. And the S curve is about to go like this in the next 6 months. And that S curve is going to be very fascinating to track, for sure.
Yeah. So what do you think about Tesla's current pricing? That's the other thing I see a lot of people comparing it to Uber, comparing it to Waymo. But I mean, I guess they're kind of probably losing money on a lot of these rides. Should we even look at pricing? Does pricing really matter that much right now?
I think right now it doesn't. I think long term, it's a signal that says Tesla is looking to go as the lowest cost per mile provider of transportation, because that's where the scale advantage will actually play in. If you have all the scale, you better offer this at a low price.
I think it's a given that they'll be the cheapest, right? If or when the technology works, right? Because the input costs are so much lower.
Exactly. And so, but I think right now it's more of a function to try to get people to max the demand of the fleet, of the actual what they're offering, right? I think it's going to be fascinating to see what they do with the pricing once they have the 1,000 cars in the Bay Area, once they have the 500 cars in the Austin metro area. It's going to be very interesting to see where the pricing is relative to everybody else, because if they're saying, okay, well, we have a lot of demand, we're like our cars are easy to hail, people love the experience, and if that price starts inching up closer to Uber, then the signal that sense, and let's say that the safety riders are yanked, right? What's the signal there? Tesla's about to make a lot of money.
That's actually a good point. I think when they kind of get to a fleet, because we have some data on Waymo, right? Waymo, there was a report by a company, Obi, that looked at Waymo's pricing compared to Uber and Lyft. It was 40% more.
Yeah.
And, it took longer to get a Waymo than an Uber, which kind of makes sense. And, riders were kind of happy to wait longer and pay more, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. But, Waymo's at that fleet size of 1,000 or 1,500 vehicles. That's where, when you're at 1,500 vehicles doing 25 trips a day, if you're losing, $5-10 a ride on that, that adds up pretty quickly. That's sort of when you need to
100%.
at least get close, to maybe not making money, but, break even or just losing a couple bucks, right?
Exactly right. And I don't think we're going to see the financials from Waymo for a long time because it is a subsidiary of Google, and Google's
Right.
kind of has in a sort of special projects category. And the reason why they don't share the financials is because it's probably a money losing business, probably a severely money losing business. But what I would expect, I think the Tesla example is interesting because I fully expect them to share the financials of Robotaxi sometime in the next 12 months. Because if you just sit down and do the math and sort of think about the cost to build a car, the scale of the car, and then once the safety rider is yanked and the safety profile of the car is somewhere around a human level, then the teleoperator to car ratio should be low enough to where Tesla's able to make, at a dollar per mile cost to the person who's hailing the vehicle, they should be making something like 30-40% margin per mile.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the math on the back end from my perspective.